In today's day, most of our movements are captured on video, whether on public transport, in stores or banks, or even in the background of other people's recordings. And on top of that, there is Google Maps, which sometimes captures the most mundane moments of an everyman's day. But on rare occasions, Google manages to capture something unsettling or bizarre, like a criminal going about everyday life. Join us for this video as we examine 3 cases of killers photographed on Google Maps. Gioacchino Gammino is probably not a name many of you are familiar with, but during the 1980s, the Italian national was investigated for drug trafficking. He was believed to have been a member of a crime organization in Campobello di Lisata, a town east of Agrigento, Sicily, with the organization itself being an offshoot of the Sicilian mafia, the Cosa Nostra. The clan had risen to power after breaking away from said mafia, and the conflict between the two was difficult and violent, leaving 200 people dead during one clash in the 1990s. In 1999, Gammino came to the attention of authorities once more when he was found to have been involved in a murder. However, while he was awaiting trial in the Rebebbia prison in Rome, he managed to escape. On June 26, 2002, authorities discovered that he had simply walked out of the prison entrance during the hustle and bustle of a film crew arriving to shoot scenes for a TV show. Gammino subsequently went on the run. In 2014, he was convicted of murder in absentia, and an arrest warrant was issued. For nearly 2 decades, Gammino remained on the lam, but then in 2021, an image on Google Maps was discovered by Italian authorities. The simple snapshot showed 2 men talking on a street corner outside of a small grocery store in the town of Galapaga, not far from Madrid in Spain. Initially, the exact circumstances of how investigators discovered the image and tracked Gammino were unknown, as they declined to share such information while the case was still active. However, they later noted that they discovered that the store Gammino was pictured in front of have ties to him, and they didn't expect to see the man himself standing right there when they looked into it. At first, authorities weren't sure if the man was really Gammino, who would have been 61 at the time. They noticed he had a similar height and build, but that wasn't enough to go on. They then discovered that the store used the same telephone number as a restaurant that had closed down years prior. The social media pages for the restaurant were still up online, and it was here that they found an image of the restaurant chef standing next to an oven. Using age progression technology on an old photo of Gammino, they determined that the chef had a strong resemblance to how Gammino would look in the present day. After they reached out to Spanish authorities, Gammino was apprehended on December 17, 2021, while walking down the street. He reportedly asked, "How did you find me? I haven't even called my family for 10 years. Investigators learned after his capture that he was going by the name Manu and had cut off all ties with his family back in Italy, creating a new life for himself in Spain instead. He'd even gotten married. Gammino was ultimately extradited to Italy in order to serve the rest of his sentence. At 136 Ponciano Diaz, a street in Toluca, Mexico, and dated 2019, Google Maps shows the image of a man dressed in black standing at one of the windows of the upper front floor of the home. Though this seems like something uninteresting or commonplace, the person standing at the window is in fact Óscar García Guzmán, a ruthless serial killer known as the Monster of Toluca. Little is known about Guzmán's early life. He was born sometime in 1990 and claimed that he grew up in an abusive household, where his father was violent towards him and his mother. Though he would later tell authorities that he'd been interested in death and murder from a young age, even stating that he admired the intelligence of serial killers, it's worth noting that unlike many of his criminal peers, Guzmán seemed to absolutely adore animals, keeping several, including both dogs and cats, as pets. Following his arrest, he repeatedly asked about their welfare. Dr. Fegi Ostrowski, a psychologist, gave her opinion on this when talking with the media, stating that Guzmán likely saw himself as a protector of the animals and that he fulfilled a certain desire for power by caring for them, as the animals offered no resistance. She added that she believed Guzmán was both a psychopath and a narcissist. Neighbours, meanwhile, described him as a quiet man who appeared to be somewhat of a loner. He was often seen dressed in black and was in the middle of earning his degree in psychology at the time of his crimes. Guzmán's first victim was his own father, whom he killed when he was just 16 years old. The exact details of his father's death are unknown, but several sources, including the Chicago Tribune, noted that he confessed to the crime in a phone call to his mother from prison. The prosecution also confirmed that he was responsible for the crime. Guzmán is known to have killed a teenage girl named Monica Chavez and her father, Tomas. They were his second and third victims. According to reports, Guzmán met Monica in 2012 at a high school in Otzolotepec. He would have been 22 years old at the time. After encountering Monica, Guzmán began stalking her and eventually broke into her house in the hopes of raiding through her things in her bedroom. However, he was unaware that Monica's father was in the home, and when he was confronted by Tomas, he decided to kill him. Tomas was stabbed repeatedly, but the final blow was dealt by an axe. Guzmán remained inside the residence until Monica returned, after which he subdued her and took her to his house at 136 Ponciano Diaz, where he lived alone with financial support from his mother. Monica was kept alive for 2 weeks, where she was subjected to sexual abuse and torture. Guzmán beat her to death 2 days before her birthday, before dismembering her remains and dumping them in a ravine in Mexico City. On March 24, 2017, 27-year-old University of Toluca student Adriana González Hernández disappeared after leaving her home. At the time, she was in a relationship with Guzmán, as she'd introduced him as her boyfriend to her family a few days earlier. He would later chillingly confess that he'd kept Adriana alive until February of 2018. Guzmán's fifth victim was Martha Patricia Patty Nava Sotelo, a 25-year-old student who was last seen on February the 9th, 2019. In the months before she went missing, she had told her family that she was afraid she was being stalked and mentioned that there was someone who drove a black truck who appeared to be following her at various times. Notably, one of Guzmán's neighbours was Patty's mother, with authorities theorising that that's how he was familiar with the 25-year-old. Guzmán abducted Patty and brought her back to his home, where she was held captive for several days before she was killed. 23-year-old Jessica Jaramillo was Guzmán's final victim. She was a psychology student and a mother of one who disappeared on October the 24th, 2019. Her disappearance was noticed that day by her parents when they discovered that she wasn't waiting at the university for them when they went to collect her after class. However, she called her mother to say that she was going out. In a text message a few minutes later, she added, "Don't worry, I'm with Óscar." Jessica's parents believed that she was with Óscar, the father of her 10-month-old baby whom she'd broken up with, not Óscar Guzmán. But when she didn't come home that night and failed to answer any of their calls, they grew alarmed. Her older brother traced her phone through her Google account and discovered she was in the neighborhood of Villa Santin. The family subsequently climbed into their car and headed to the area, where they started knocking on doors. One neighbor told them to check out 136 Ponciano Diaz Street, where a strange man who always dressed in black lived. The neighbor noted that women seemed to go into the home and never come back out, and gave the parents a detailed description of Guzmán, whom they recognized as a classmate Jessica had told them about. He'd reportedly asked her out several times, but she turned him down each time. She believed he had started stalking her afterwards, and she subsequently transferred to another university to escape him. Though the family went to the door of Guzmán's house, nobody answered. Some of the family members then went to the police, while others stayed at the scene. But progress was slow, and a judge denied a search warrant for Guzmán's house. 4 days later, on October the 28th, Guzmán told authorities that he and Jessica were friends with benefits and that he'd seen her on the 24th, but she'd left to visit the father of her baby after they'd shared a pizza. Investigators finally obtained a search warrant on October the 30th. Inside Guzmán's house, they found Jessica's body. She'd been strangled to death and had been killed just hours before she was found. There was no sign of the killer. He'd already skipped town. Despite taunting the authorities for weeks over social media, Guzmán was not able to evade capture for long. He was arrested on December the 6th, 2019 in Mexico City. His location had been traced after he'd connected to public Wi-Fi. In 2021, Guzmán was convicted of rape and sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, he was subsequently convicted of 2 murders, including Jessica's, and later charged with the murder of his father. In total, he has been given a 217-year jail sentence. In July of 2011, on Pluto Drive in Anchorage, Alaska, the most seemingly mundane image can be found of a white truck with a trailer on the back. However, if you look closer, you will see that there are words on the storage unit attached to the trailer, reading keysconstruction.net. And placed right between the truck and the trailer is infamous killer Israel Keyes and his young daughter. Israel Keyes was born in Richmond, Utah on January the 7th, 1978. He grew up in a rather isolated environment. He was homeschooled, his home had no running water or electricity, and his family attended services at a Christian church which spouted white supremacist values. As a young adult, he was known to have started fires, stolen guns, and even killed animals, including the family cat. He once admitted to gutting a deer while it was still alive and told authorities, "I would hunt anything with a heartbeat." His behaviour led him to keep his distance from his peers, even those he'd carried out burglaries with, as they didn't approve of his desire to kill. One of the skills he picked up during his youth was carpentry, which would eventually help him establish his own construction business as an adult. In 1998, Keyes moved to New York and joined the US Army. He was known to be a bit of a loner by his fellow soldiers, and he often drank heavily on the weekends. 1 year earlier, he'd sexually assaulted a teenage girl in Oregon, later admitting that he'd originally planned to kill her, but "I was too timid. I wasn't violent enough." He added, "I made up my mind I was never going to let that happen again." Though he spent much of his time on his own, Keyes still appeared on the outside to be relatively normal at this point. In 2000, he began dating a woman living in the Makah Reservation in Washington, and the pair had a daughter in 2001. Following an honorable discharge from the army, Keyes moved in with the woman and began working for the Makah Tribal Council, a job he held for 6 years until the couple split up. He then moved to Anchorage, Alaska with his daughter. It was here that he would begin Keyes Construction, and he was generally seen as a competent hard worker. Although several female customers who'd had interactions with him recalled that he had brief facial expressions and shifts in mood that made them uncomfortable. One of the most notable aspects of Keyes' criminal career is the fact that he often targeted random people all across the country. Unlike many serial slayers, he did not operate in one specific area in which he was comfortable. Furthermore, his victims didn't fit a specific profile. He stated that he generally attacked people in parks, cemeteries, or campgrounds, and that they were often random individuals he'd come across. He told authorities, "Not as much to choose from, in a manner of speaking, but there's also no witnesses really. There's no one else around." In order to avoid detection, Keyes was also known to scope out areas before carrying out his crimes, and he would bury his murder kit nearby so that he could collect it before he killed. He was always careful to turn off his mobile phone when he was committing his crimes, and if he needed to make any kind of purchase, he always did so with cash. Keyes stated that he never killed parents or children, a rule that he had come up following the birth of his daughter, but investigators have remained skeptical of this claim in the years since, suspecting that he did in fact harm young children and teenagers. He also admitted to law enforcement that while he had not carried out any murders during his time with the army, he had attempted several rapes, and between 2001 and 2012, he is believed to have robbed several homes and banks, and had set fire to one home in Texas. Though Keyes is possibly connected to about 11 slayings, he only admitted to 3. On June 8, 2011, he broke into the home of William Bill Currier and his wife Lorraine. By all accounts, he thought they were ideal victims. 2 adults with no children or dogs in the home and a garage attached to the house. He subsequently tied the 2 up and drove them to an abandoned farmhouse, where Bill was shot to death while Lorraine was sexually assaulted and strangled. Keyes admitted that he preferred to strangle his victims as he delivered pleasure from seeing them lose consciousness. The murders were very carefully planned. Keyes flew to Chicago and then rented a car to drive 1,000 miles to Vermont, where the couple lived. He used a murder kit, which he had stashed in the area 2 years earlier, to carry out the crime. Following their deaths, he moved the kit to Parrishville, New York. Keyes' most notorious crime, however, was the murder of 18-year-old Samantha Cohen. Samantha was a coffee booth employee in Anchorage, whose chilling abduction on February 1, 2012 went viral when the CCTV footage of it was released online. Keyes killed her the following day, having stolen some of her property and sexually assaulted her before death. However, unlike with many of his other crimes, Keyes held onto her body, leaving her stashed in a shed in his backyard. For 2 weeks, Samantha's body remained there while he went on holiday with his family. Upon his return, he applied makeup to her face and used fishing line to sew her eyes open before posing her. He then took a photo of her while he held up a 4-day-old issue of the Anchorage Daily News, as if to make it appear that she was still alive. He subsequently demanded a $30,000 ransom payout from her family. Samantha's body was then dismembered and disposed of in Matanuska Lake, though the remains were later recovered by the FBI. Keyes was arrested by Texas Highway Patrol officers in the car park of a cafe on March 13, 2012, after his vehicle was identified as the one seen on CCTV when Samantha Cohen's ransom money was collected. Inside the vehicle, investigators discovered Samantha's debit card and cell phone, as well as cash stained with bright ink, which was indicative that it came from a bank robbery. Keyes initially cooperated with the police while in custody, but once his name was revealed to the media, he became difficult to work with. He stated that he did not wish his daughter to receive backlash for his actions. At one point, he told authorities, "I want my kid to have a chance to grow up. You know, she's in a safe place now. She's not going to see any of this. I want her to have a chance to grow up and not have all this hanging over her head." Keyes took his own life while incarcerated at the Anchorage Correctional Complex on December 2, 2012, while awaiting trial.